The non-biblical reading that I've chosen for today comes from a book by Brene Brown. It's called The Gifts of Imperfection. Let go of who you think you're supposed to be and embrace who you are, your guide to wholehearted life. Last weekend, I led a retreat on the spirituality of resilience, and I know a number of you were there. We had such a wonderful conversation about being resilient that I wanted to share some of the points of that retreat with you all and sort of expand some of them a little bit. So let me begin with this reading. Resilience, the ability to overcome adversity, has been a growing topic of study since the early 1970s. We want to understand why some people can cope with stress and trauma in a way that allows them to move forward in their lives, and why other people appear more affected and stuck. As I collected and analyzed my data, I recognized that many of the people I interviewed were describing stories of resilience. The stories had more in common than just resilience. All of these stories were about spirit. According to the people I interviewed, the very foundation of the things that made them bouncy was their spirituality. Without exception, spirituality, the belief in connection, a power greater than self, and interconnections grounded in love and compassion emerged as a component of resilience.
I am reading from Genesis chapter 32. In the course of the night, Jacob arose, took the entire caravan, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok River. After Jacob had crossed with all his possessions, he returned to the camp, and he was completely alone. And there, someone wrestled with Jacob until the first light of dawn. Seeing that Jacob could not be overpowered, the other struck Jacob at the socket of the hip, and the hip was dislocated as they wrestled. Then Jacob's contender said, "Let me go, for day is breaking." Jacob answered, "I will not let you go until you bless me." "What is your name?" the other asked. "Jacob," he answered. The other said, "Your name will no longer be called Jacob, or heel grabber, but Israel, overcomer of God, because you have wrestled with both God and mortals, and you have prevailed." Then Jacob asked, "Now tell me your name, I beg you." The other said, "Why do you ask me my name?" and blessed Jacob there. Jacob named the place Peniel, face of God, because I have seen God face to face, yet my life was spared. At sunrise, Jacob left Peniel, limping along from the injured hip. That is why to this day the Israelites do not eat the sciatic muscle that is on the animal's hip socket, because Jacob's hip socket was struck at the sciatic muscle.
Would you pray with me? Holy One, life comes with many ups and downs, challenges, mistakes, frustrations, hurts and pains. Help us to understand ways to get through, ways to lean on you. Help us to understand ourselves and spirit more deeply. And may the words of my mouth, the meditations of each of our hearts, be filled with your insight and your wisdom. Amen. So resilience. The ability to get through adversity and tough times and challenges. I have to share a little bit about what I was going to do with the kids because it's just too fun not to. We all know people who are very bouncy. This probably would have been dangerous, come to think of it, with the children's time, but we people who, for whatever reason, no matter what they have to face, they seem able to face it with a really bouncy nature. And it's not to say it's easy for people to get through everything, but they do. They seem to come back quickly. They seem to come through with more compassion and more strength from the challenges or the mistakes or whatever it is that they've faced. And then there are people who don't. For some reason, some folks just don't bounce back very well. They get stuck in the struggles or the mistakes or the sadness or the grief or whatever it is that they're facing, and end up depressed or anxious or weighed down and negative, and don't bounce back like others. We all want to be the first ball. We all want to be the bouncy one. The one that no matter what comes at us, we're back up and with things and stronger and better for it. What contributes to that resilience? How do we get there? And what does that have to do with our spirituality? Those are some of the questions we talked about in the retreat last weekend. And what I shared were 5 different pieces of what makes us resilient. And you can go out there and you can read all kinds of stuff and did all kinds of research and you can come up with other pieces, but these were the 5 that seem to encompass the most for me. So the 5 are not numbing, no numbing allowed, leaning into the situation, maintaining a sense of meaning and purpose in one's life, critical awareness, and support staff. So to talk, and underneath all of that is what Brene Brown was talking about, which is spirituality. Our spirituality is something that brings us perspective and meaning and purpose. And so I'm not talking about our religion. I'm not talking about something that means you have to go to church or follow a certain belief or say a certain creed. It's that connection instead of something greater than ourselves that gives us a grounding, a foundation, a sense of strength, a sense of purpose, a sense of comfort and courage that helps us in all of those areas. So I'd like to use the story of Jacob that Diane read for us to sort of flesh out this concept of resilience a little bit. But let me give you the backstory to the scripture for this morning. So Jacob and Esau were born twins. And Esau was born first. Jacob came out supposedly holding on to Esau's heel, hence the name heel grabber that you heard in this story. In ancient times, it was no good to be second, even if you were the second of twins. That firstborn got all of the privileges, got the inheritance, got the father's blessing, got everything. And so I think Jacob was not happy with that. It's like, I was just this late, and I was holding on. I was right there. Really, we were born at the same time. I don't know. So Jacob, as he gets older, finds a way to manipulate and lie and to steal not only Esau's birthright, but the blessing from their father that was to be given only to the firstborn. So Jacob steals both of those very precious things from his older brother, incurring Esau's wrath. And then Jacob skips town. Says, I'm out of here before he kills me. And so he runs. It's classic avoidance behavior. Or perhaps numbing behavior. And so that sort of brings us to the first of of our resilience pieces. There is no numbing allowed if you are going to be a resilient person, or at least only a little bit of numbing allowed. So what's another, aside from running away and avoiding, what's another numbing tactic? Something else to take the edge off. Sharon's up here doing this. Let's play charades. Yes, drinking, top of the list. What else is a numbing tactic? Drugs, sleeping, ignoring. Denial is a beautiful place.
Blaming others.
What, blaming others? Is that what you said, Dad? What else? Social media, absolutely. What else? Busyness. If I don't stop, I don't have to think. Anything else? Could be working. You become a workaholic, an exerciseaholic. Could be comfort eating. Could be retail therapy. QVC, I don't know. Renee Brown in this book tells us, so she did all kinds of, her research was basically around vulnerability. She said when she began her research, she was an addict. She said she would have been perfectly comfortable saying, "Hi, my name's Renee. Today I'd like to deal with vulnerability and uncertainty with an apple fritter, a beer, a cigarette, and 7 hours on Facebook." She said she had a sponsor who sat her down one night and said, "Renee, you have the poo-poo platter of addictions. You have a little bit of everything. So really, I think it would be best if you just quit drinking, smoking, comfort eating, and getting in your family's business." And Renee said she threw down her fork and she said, "Well, that's just great, isn't it? I'm just going to have lots of free time now to go to all of those meetings." Numbing, classical numbing behavior with all of those things. And she said in her research she found that pretty much everybody numbs to some extent. Everybody takes the edge off to some extent. The question becomes, does that numbing behavior get in the way of your authenticity? Does that numbing behavior keep you from being honest with yourself and others? Does that numbing behavior keep you from being connected to somebody else or to God? Does it isolate you? Does that numbing behavior keep you from addressing reality? And if any of those things are true, then you need to take a really hard look at oneself. Because there are two huge issues with numbing behavior, and one is that you can't just numb the bad stuff. You can't just stuff down those particular emotions. You end up stuffing everything. You don't just get to say, "I'm not going to be sad, but I'm going to experience all this joy." It all gets stuffed. And the second piece is that basically you can run, but you can't hide. As much as we'd like to run away like Jacob did, as much as we'd like to live in denial or in a state where we've numbed the hurt and the pain and the fear and whatever it is that's getting to us, it follows us. And eventually it comes out, and often it comes out in really unhealthy ways when we least expect it, because we've touched something else that reminds us of that hurt and pain. And so, if you're going to be a resilient person, numbing doesn't work. Running away doesn't work. Eventually, you have to face it, you have to lean into it, which brings us back to the Jacob story. So Jacob ran away. He ran far enough ways that he spent a whole lot of his life somewhere else. He got a couple of wives, had some children, built up huge herds of animals, and then had servants and employees to take care of them. He was living a pretty good life. And then God came along one day and said, "Jacob, it's time for you to go back to your ancestors' land and see your relatives." "Oh, but don't worry, I'll be with you," God said. And basically, you don't say no to God. So Jacob packed up his stuff and headed out. But Jacob was a little concerned because he had been horribly deceitful and manipulative with his brother, and now here he had to go back and face him all of these years later. And we all know that the longer you put something off, the worse it gets. So, Jacob figures he's going to send some messengers ahead of him, just to let Esau know, give him a heads up, make sure everything's going to be all right. The messenger came back and said, "Oh, your brother's riding out to meet you with 400 men." It doesn't sound good. So Jacob decides he's going to soften him up a little bit. He said, "I got all these animals. I'll just send a few herds of animals ahead first as gifts." So he gets those set, 3 herds of animals, spaced out a little bit, told the drover of each of them, say, "This is a gift from your brother Jacob," gets those all set, sends them out ahead. He comes to the Jabbok River with all of his possessions and his wives and his kids and everybody who's left, his own herds that are left. Now, the Jabbok River, Jabbok is also a name for, it means crossroads, literally. And so Jacob's come to a crossroad in his life, a time where he has to make a decision as to how things are going to go. He takes everybody across the river, and it's the night before he's going to see Esau. And he goes back to the far side of the river to spend the night by himself. Now, if you are Jacob, what's going through your head as you're about to meet your brother, but your long time ago brother that you left after deceiving him and lying to him and manipulating him and stealing his birthright and his blessing?
Fear.
Anxiety. Guilt, anxiety, shame. Stress. Are you worried? I mean, God said God's going to be with you. Are you fully on board with that? Yeah, no, probably not. But Jacob does what anybody who's going to be resilient has to do. And he leans into the situation. No, if we're done avoiding, we're done running away, it's time to face up to what's happened and all of his fears and all of his anxiety. It's time to engage the process and get through one way or another. And so he spends the night alone. And we hear in the story that he spends it wrestling with, quote unquote, someone. Who is the someone? Well, the someone could be God, it could be himself, it could be an angel, it could be all of the above. But he wrestles and he doesn't give up. He does not give in. Even after his hips dislocated and he's in lots of pain, he doesn't stop the struggle. Because it's time to lean in and deal with this. Which sort of brings us to the next point. So we're done numbing, we're leaning in, and now he's finding resilience because he knows that there is a future for him and for his family and for his kids, and a potential for the family to get back together. He's finding meaning and purpose in his future. Joan Borisenko says that resilient people don't wait passively for their future to happen. They become their future by consciously creating it. And so he's willing to hang in there with this person to struggle to create his own future. Or hang in there with himself to create his own future. And he comes out of it in the end by making sure that a blessing happens. That he's blessed by this contender. Now, whether that blessing is live long and prosper, or whether the blessing is more specific than that for his future, maybe that blessing simply means that understanding of himself and of God. That he's wrestled long enough, he's leaned into it hard enough, he understands himself better, he's got more compassion around the issue, and he knows what's important now, and how he needs to go further. And he's grown because of that. Maybe that's the blessing. And that blessing sounds an awful lot like being critically aware, doesn't it? That he's wrestled with himself, with God, with the situation, and has found some awareness. And so that's the other piece of resilience, is being able to be critically aware of what's going on with us. So that we're not living with illusion, but that we're dealing with reality. So that we can see the big picture. So that we know when we're telling ourselves stories that really have nothing to do with reality. That we're stepping back and getting some perspective. Robert Wicks, in his book, Spiritual Resilience, talks about coming home one day from seeing patients in his psychology practice all day. And he came home and he was just really, really down. And he walked in and his wife did one of those, "Hi honey, how you doing? How was your day?" And he almost said that 4-letter word that we all just say, "Fine." But he didn't. Decided he would lean in. Terrible. And she said, "Why? What happened?" And he sat down at the kitchen table, raincoat on, and he started to do what he tells his patients to do. He started to go back through the day and think about what had happened. Think about what had hooked him during the day. What had negative beliefs had, worked their way under his skin. What was it that was weighing on him so deeply? What was he telling himself? And as he processed it and what had happened and what he was feeling and what he was thinking, he realized that it wasn't just something that happened that day, that it was an accumulation of things that had happened for the last couple of weeks. And he realized that he'd been allowing himself to absorb all of the sadness and the depression and the pain and the helplessness and the hopelessness of his patients, and that it was bringing him down. That's critical awareness. That's leaning into it. That's stopping long enough to find some perspective and some understanding, and then to be able to move forward and grow because of it. Both Brene Brown and Robert Wicks had something that it seems like Jacob didn't have. It seems like they had a support staff, which is also very important in being a resilient person. That you have people around you who are there for you in a number of different ways. I read one article that said you should have 4 different kinds of people in your life. You should have cheerleaders, those people who are there for you no matter what, with their little pom-poms. "You rah-rah, Sharon, you're awesome. I don't care what you did. It was everybody else's fault." You need the cheerleaders in your lives. And then you need the harassers. I have Tony. Somebody who teases you, harasses you, who keeps you honest by keeping things light. Doesn't mean they're lying to you, but they help you to see things a little, you all know those folks, right? They jab you enough that you know when you're playing games with yourself. And they do it in a fun, easy way. Then we have the prophets. A prophet is somebody that you go to because you know they will be honest with you even if you don't want to hear it. But you know that that's what you need. They're not going to be your little cheerleader, you rah-rah, you're perfect, Sharon. They're going to be, all right, Sharon, I know this is hard to hear, but this is what I see. They're the people who are honest with us when we need it. And then we have the people who are our guides. Sometimes our guides are our therapists. Sometimes they're our spouses and our partners, our best friends. Somebody who helps us to find the answers for ourselves. To look inside and get clarity about what we're thinking and what we're feeling, about who we are and what's going on with us. those 4 types of people. You know, Brene Brown had her sponsor and all the 12-step people. Robert Wicks obviously had his wife that would listen to him and reflect back to him what she was hearing. We need those folks. I don't know who Jacob had. Way back in the day, I don't know that men had a whole lot of people that confide in at all. And so he wrestled and struggled with himself. But we need a support staff to be resilient. And on top of all that, we need to maintain that connection with the divine. Because it's that grounding underneath it all that gives us a foundation to build on, to build those relationships on, to give us the courage to lean in and to stop running. That foundation that gives us a greater sense of the world and who we are, of meaning and purpose for our lives. And so Jacob was blessed in not giving up, and in leaning in, and in struggling with himself and with God. And we too, if we lean into whatever's going on, the grief and the pain and the loss and the mistakes, the failures, the whatever it is that challenges us, we can't just bury it and deny it. It's not going anywhere. It's engaging it and working through it that helps us to grow and be stronger. Be more resilient. Amen.